Hello, I'm your host, Brian Callanan. A proposed development of tiny houses in North Seattle has raised a number of questions from local residents. What impact could these homes have on our city's homelessness crisis? Also, there's a new effort underway to work with Native American tribes that could change the way Seattle approaches affordable housing. Seattle City Council President Debora Juarez is with me to discuss these topics and the questions you're sending in too, next on Council Edition.
I don't think it's my job to be liked. I think it's my job to be respected and that people know that I don't lie.
All that and more coming up next on City Inside Out, Council Edition. And joining me right now, here she is, the Council President of the Seattle City Council, Debora Juarez from District 5. And I just wanted to say, Council President Juarez, thank you for being on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, and it's good to be back. I know it's been a while, but, and I actually mean this, I'm actually happy to be back.
All right, we'll take it, we'll take it, we'll take it. Well, let me jump into a topic that has received plenty of public feedback in your district over the past couple weeks. This proposal to build a tiny house village on Lake City Way near 85th for about 50 residents here. This was the scene up at Faith Lutheran Church at the end of June. Looking at some video here, people lined up to ask their questions about this facility. The Low-Income Housing Institute, or LEHI, which is going to build and run this tiny house village, was there to answer them. There were questions about how people are vetted to enter a tiny house village. There are questions about crime possibly being attracted to this facility. There were people who were very glad to see this tiny house village being built, so a full spectrum of opinions there. I guess I just wanted to ask, what do you want people living in District 5 to know about this tiny house village, and what do you tell people who might be concerned about it?
Well, let's roll back a little bit here. This isn't the first time that we've placed a tiny house village that turned into actual brick and mortar in D5 or, for that matter, any district. Mm-hmm. And what's been nice with Lehigh and some of our other partners in affording this type of housing is that they've really have a model now that brings in the community and has a board. I remember when we were doing two other tiny house villages that now one of them is actual brick and mortar, mm-hmm. where they gave us like 10 conditions and 10 issues that they needed to be addressed, and Lehigh addressed, I think we got 8 of the 10, and people were good with that. So D5 has one of the highest rates of homelessness, but we only have one now tiny house village. And as I was sharing with you before the cameras rolled, yeah. Districts 1, 4, and 5 have one tiny house village. Yeah. Districts 2, 6, and 7 have 2, and District 2 has 4. So I think what I've seen in the progression since 2015 to now is we didn't really have a blueprint to how we would, ramp things up, sure. level things up, bring community in, have supportive, have 24-hour surveillance, have social workers there, and also making it transitional. So it's a tiny house, and we expect the next level is to get you into a brick and mortar apartment or wherever you need to be. Mm-hmm. And that took a while, and I think people should give us credit for at least we started it, and I think we've gotten better at it. Yeah. And what we do need in this city, though, is more welcoming neighborhoods. Yeah, and I just wanted to talk about that, just to jump back on that point you were making about where these tiny house villages are located in Seattle. One of your staffers actually put together a map that I'm going to show folks at home right now. Just checking this out. This map moving from north to south, that green icon is where the new facility would go. You mentioned this D5 only has about 8% of Seattle's tiny house locations. D2, as you move down the map, has hosted 30%, as your office reported here. I wanted to talk a little bit more about this, about what that map says to you. Does Seattle have a good spread of resources when it comes to tiny house villages? Is it equitable? I know that's always a concern for the council. Well, I'll be very candid, as I normally am. No, it hasn't been fair across the board for our great city, from the south to the north. We do need more welcoming neighborhoods that understand that our unhoused neighbors, folks, this is a good, safe place for them to be. And I mean, when Councilor Bagshaw was here and other council members who worked hard on this, it's so difficult, but I've seen a big change in the last 4 years about more neighborhoods being welcoming. Because you can't, on one hand, wear a T-shirt that says no sweeps, house the homeless. Oh, but by the way, not in my neighborhood, not next to my community center, not next to my children's park, not where my kids play soccer. And now, I think people are recognizing that that type of humanity is what makes us a great city, and now I'm seeing more people open to tiny houses, whatever configuration they come in.
And I wanted to talk a little bit more about tiny houses specific to Lehigh and what they're saying about it. A brief soundbite from this meeting, actually, from Sharon Lee, the executive director of Lehigh. I thought she made a very important point as to how tiny house villages can offer a form of housing more quickly than other housing options. Here's what she said.
Deeply affordable housing is the answer, but it takes 4 years to pull together a building. And so what we've been trying to do is come up with a solution that is cost effective, and we got so tired of people living in tents, living on the streets, living unsheltered. Over 300 homeless individuals died from homelessness last year, and the numbers keep increasing.
And I'm bringing this up because we're at a bit of an inflection point when it comes to the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. CEO Mark Dones recently stepped down. Mark, not a huge fan of tiny house villages, wanted to make sure Seattle was not investing too much in that option. I talked to them about that. As the authority looks for a new leader, how do you approach this tiny house village issue with KCRHA? Are you pushing to build more? How do you deal with that piece of it?
Well, without getting too much into the politics, because a while back, and I'm going to hopefully the people who are watching, some people remember when we had the Barb Poppy report. Mm-hmm. And we have grown as a city in how we address homelessness. And we don't want any more just a cot in a church basement. We've moved from that to tiny house villages, transitional housing, to having more welcoming neighborhoods, having more brick and mortar, supportive services, low barrier, meeting people where they're at. So Sharon Lee is right. We do need that, but as long as it stays transitional. And I have a lot of respect for Mark Dones, but I sometimes just would shake my head about the disagreement that Lehigh was having with the King County Regional Housing Authority, which I helped set up, because I was concerned that at some point, the bottom line is this: you want to get people under a roof, because the minute you house them, then you start addressing the medical issues, the mental health issues, finding their families. I mean, those are the things, and you can't do that till you have them there. And I guess that's where, I was hoping for a better outcome, quite frankly.
Yeah, I just touching on this also, I know the city council is working, the city's working on the situation with Lehigh to have an RV safe parking area in the Inner Bay neighborhood, which I know is not in your district, but I think this is something that could serve a lot of people. And I feel that this is important because the idea there is as well bringing these RVs, but people aren't saying just park here for a little while. Okay, leave your RV here. We're going to help you transition out of that vehicle into permanent housing. That's another piece of this puzzle.
Right, and let me just bring you back to something. This issue isn't district centered.
Of course
okay?
not, yeah.
So, and particularly with the RVs, and then with the Blake decision, and these are people's homes. My parents spent the last 5 years after retirement being RVers, and so a different kind of RVing, but I understand that. So my point is, we go back to welcoming neighborhoods. We go back to where is a big, safe spot. And we were looking at one time, some places in D5, particularly when some big box stores had left. Yeah. But a lot of it is on private property. And getting, there's liability there. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have, I'll give you a good example. When Sam's Club left D5 with this huge, empty, big building with outlets, and a lot of these private property, there's the liability. What if someone gets hurt, someone gets shot, someone gets robbed, someone gets assaulted, there's a fire. We've seen fires. Yeah. And it's gotten to where, you can understand why, not in all cases, but you can understand why private property people say, look, I do not want to open up this huge parking lot that I own and pay taxes on to an RV where I have no say and I don't know what's going to go on here. And even if I do have a say, I don't know how weighted that say is. Mm-hmm. And that's what concerns. I've had private offline conversations with big lot owners in my district and a few other districts, and that's probably the more clarion call I hear. Yeah. I will have no control once I hand it over, and I don't know what's going to happen, and I don't want to be liable.
Wow, there's a lot of concerns with that, and I thank you for breaking down all those pieces. I do want to talk about another development going on in North Seattle, a groundbreaking recently for some new affordable housing units in D5. I'm talking about the Nook at North Haven here, 89 units for people making 60-80% of the area median income, scheduled to come online December 2024. What's a little bit different about this, as I'm reading it, The facility will have a built-in 6-classroom early learning center run by Rewa, the Refugee Women's Alliance, which will run a facility for more than 100 preschoolers. I wanted to talk about this project because I know you're excited about it. I hear you
am.
giggling in the background there, but what impact is it going to have on the need for affordable housing in Seattle? That's a big deal, especially in North Seattle. And talk about this early learning center, because that's a model I feel like could be used in many more locations citywide.
Well, I'm laughing because, and you and I talked a little bit about this, this is one of the things I'll be very proud of when I do leave office. I have worked with North Haven since 2015, and they obviously have housing there for elders, mainly Medicaid. And so we've been working with them forever to get them in the budget, to rezone so they could go up and we can bring more elders in. So we already had the Rewa at the Tony Lee house with pre-K, which was Susan Lee. It went wonderful, all these great little kids, it was wonderful. So Susan's and I were talking, and I'm like, you know, how cool would it be to have these children at North Haven, where we got the money in the budget and they got money as well to match, with Rewa for the first time to have intergenerational, just like in Indian country. You have elders there with kids and kids there with elders. And it's a phenomenal space because there is a wonderful, rich transit spine. There's a park. There's the Kraken Community Iceplex. If I were teaching a class in urban planning, I would say this is a good example of community. So it's our second one in D5.
Right.
And it's been such a success with the first one at the Tony Lee House. And so having this one is something I'm going to pay attention to for as long as I live in the district. And I cannot say enough about Susan Lee at Rewa and their board and One Roof Foundation.
Yeah.
They wonderful folks.
Can I jump in with Rewa for a little bit? Just you were part of this recent Rewa graduation ceremony up at the Iceplex in North Seattle, and we had a few photos here. Quite an event. You were honored for your work in D5, a number of other local dignitaries there too. I believe you even tried to hug a lion dancer at this graduation. Looks like that was fun. Might have been a tackle there, I'm not sure. But the real takeaway that I saw, 60 kids went through this program from many different cultural backgrounds. Some of them had never even seen an ice rink before. 95% of them able to participate due to some tuition support. What does an event like this mean for those kids and families?
Well, I'm going to be a little personal here. This is where being a public servant feels really good and nice, when you can point at something and say, I did this with a group of other folks. I didn't do it by myself. That was the second graduation I spoke at. So we had one year before and did the whole rollout, and I did try to pet the big lion, but that's another thing. But anyway, the point was, and we had Danny Glover there, and Coach Wilkins came, which was wonderful. But every year it grows, and this second year with more kids and more parents, and watching OVG, NHL, and One Roof Foundation starting not last year, but the year before, because I used to help get those kids on the bus, get them on the ice, put their skates on, nothing like 100 or 50 4-year-olds. And then the second year of the graduation, and I saw the first class, right? So this was 1 year. That's why they had the little demonstration. They wanted to show us what these kids learned in a year, because Rainier, Beacon Hill, and Lake City, those are the 3 schools they use. And they load them up on the bus. They get them there. Nice bus, too. It isn't just, it's a really nice bus. And watching some of these parents, when I remember last year, and a lot of them are immigrant from all over the world, had never even seen ice. And to see their kid out there, or English is not their first language. I have a funny quick little story that this one little guy was hanging on me, and I was telling Susan, who speaks Chinese fluently, you need to tell him in Chinese that I can't skate and we're both going to fall, because he wouldn't let go of my leg. And she did, and it was funny. Then he immediately got away from me. But I've been on the ice many times, and that is one thing that brings joy to me.
Yeah, and thank you. I wanted to move, if I could, into another housing issue that involves your work with Native communities, something that came up in the Finance Committee here recently. The Council is looking at the way it deals with surplus city properties, like city light facilities, for example. 2018, the City Council passed an ordinance saying when these properties are available, putting affordable housing on them is definitely a priority. Here in 2023, the council's saying, okay, when those properties are available, affordable housing definitely still a goal here, but we need to let federally recognized tribes and urban Indian organizations know when this property is available, give them priority in acquiring this land. What's this about? What's this legislation going to do?
Well, I want to give you some historical perspective here, because this didn't just start here. This goes back to, again, in the time machine here, this goes back to the 1970s and the law as it developed in government-to-government relations and consultation. This also goes back to the 1970 fishing wars with co-management. So what we're seeing finally from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, particularly in the Clinton era, where they required federal agencies and departments nationally, and then states adopted it as well, that you have a government-to-government relationship, you have tribal consultation, and you respect the sovereignty of the tribe. So what we've done, and now the big movement of what they call it now is land back, and we call it more than a land acknowledgement. And so what you have for the first time on a city level, and I'm really proud of this because we have it at a federal level, state level, a county level, but on a city level, we have institutionalized and people thinking now, whether it's OPCD, Seattle City Light, SDCI, you need to speak like federal and state government do with local tribes or consultation or indigenous-led organizations when you have surplus property, because they are also in the business of housing. And as you know, with tribes, like we saw Muckleshoot buy a whole building in District 4 and house people, that they have the means, the interest, and this is their land, and they don't just house natives, by the way, and they do that with healthcare as well. Nothing stays within the four corners of a reservation. And there's just so much humanity, wealth, and love that we have for our people and everyone else that we're finally starting to, codify that this is something you need to do. And I want to thank Councilmember Mosqueda because she was, working with me on this. Councilmember Strauss, who chairs land use, has been working with me on this. But this started way back when Councilmember Bagshot was still here. And so we finally have got to this point where hopefully we'll have this in a law, because we've had times where land has come up in surplus land that has been in the what they call unceded or ceded areas, or UNA, usual custom areas of a particular tribe in this region. And I've had tribes call and say, well, we didn't know you had 25 acres for sale. Why didn't you call us? When I worked for a couple governors and a couple other electeds, when we would know land was coming up, the first people we would call, if it was indeed that area, ceded area, usually in the custom areas, we'd call the tribe and say, hey, and they're like, oh yeah, we used to fish there, our people there, we can build housing there for everybody, not just our own people. So I know this sounds kind of corny, but as I'm getting older, it makes me feel good that things that I said and thought and believed when I was a young lawyer are starting to finally happen now at a city level. Yeah,
and I feel like I'm going to keep going down this path. When you talk about your experience as a lawyer, there's a huge legal issue that came up with the U.S. Supreme Court recently with the Indian Welfare Act, recently upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. A big decision in favor of Native American rights and families. And I know this is a very personal issue for you too. Can you talk about this, what this means in Seattle, what it means to you, what it means around the country?
Someday let's have a separate show on what it means to me more personally, because there's a story there. But you're right, that was the Brackeen decision that upheld the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. And I think what we're seeing in this trend, as you saw what happened with the abortion decision, the Dobbs case, which undid Roe. So with the Brackeen case, they tried to roll back 45 years of jurisprudence, where tribes had the right to step into the shoes of the parents to keep the tribe together and the families. We have the same thing with the Dobbs case. They took away 50 years of jurisprudence that gave us a right of our bodies to choose. But getting back to Brackeen and what we saw. So again, it's a sad history, and I don't like to always be the one to have to say this, but we're at a point, both of them out of Texas, by the way, we're at a point where tribes, this has just been a continual, we are always in a defensive posture protecting our family, our children, our land, our water, and it's like it's never ending. And the Brackeen case just basically said what we have always said, which took an act of Congress in 1978 to say, is that if you're going to take a child out of a family or away from a family, you need to contact the tribe, because those kinship ties aren't just racial, they're political, and that means something. So what we have again is us, we had like the boarding schools, we had like the Indian Adoption Act, we've had all of these laws, we've had like 200 years of federal Indian law jurisprudence where every case is about taking something from us and us fighting back to get our own just basic human rights, our land, our children, our language, our culture. It's never ending, but we still do it.
And it makes me think, too, about the work that you've done over the past several years when it comes to passing a resolution regarding missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. This happened in 2018. I remember this meeting here. I remember all the different people who came up in regalia talking about this. And I remember also the statistics at that time. Urban Indian Health Institute's showing that Washington State had one of the highest number of cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women in the country. Seattle, highest amount for any city. Council heard so much testimony on this, and I just wanted to catch this up present day. As you see, our state now has a notification network, almost like an Amber Alert, letting people know when Indigenous people go missing. We see reader boards over the freeway, for example. From that time, through your time, I guess, on the council till now, what have you seen develop on this issue with missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, missing and murdered Indigenous people? And are we doing enough as a city, state, county, et cetera, to work on this issue?
Well, we've been very blessed in that, and I'm very proud of this city, that we were one of the very first cities not only to beyond a resolution, but to have an ordinance and then fund a position within SPD to work with Seattle Indian Health Board and the advocates there. But we also, and I have worked personally with Secretary Interior Holland and Interior, bringing this forward. We were one of the few cities where we actually, like I said, we codified it, we funded it, and the state, a lot of states were following our lead, our City of Seattle lead, including other states. And so again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Why is it we have to pass a law to ask the federal government and local law enforcement that when our women and children or people go missing, that you go look for them? We actually had to pass a law to do that. And if anyone ever wants to go back and look, when you remember we did the when we passed the first resolution, at the time it was Council President Bruce Harrell.
That's right.
He cried, and I don't tease him about it. We had a moment, and he'd never ever done that before, because he said he didn't because I did a speech about the Indian Child Welfare Act and how we have fought to keep our babies and our families together. And this just, to have this council acknowledge that and listen to the people come forward and speak about it. Yeah. Bruce, or Mayor Harrell now, was telling me that was really moving because he didn't know that.
Yeah.
When I was on Converge on Omari's show, he didn't know that.
Yeah.
He did not know an act of Congress had to be passed, and now we have missing and murdered, which another act of Congress had to be passed.
Right.
Same with the Violence Against Women Act that we had to say, look, if we have non-members assaulting, molesting, raping, hurting our women on our reservation, we should have some way in the criminal to be able to charge these people or work with local government to make sure that they're arrested.
Yeah.
Then it becomes a jurisdictional fight instead of the humanity fight about protecting people.
Right. I think so much about all the work you've done for Native communities. You were the first Native American on the Seattle City Council when you were elected, and I think it's about that time, Deborah, if I could, just to reflect with you on these past years and where you see your legacy sitting. Where is that? How do you look at that?
I'm glad you asked that, because usually when we come, you and I are I'm a little bit more formal, and I got, 170 something days left.
But who's counting?
Yeah, no one's counting. It's been and I mean this, it has been such an honor to represent this great city. It has been such an honor to represent this city with tribal governments and going back to National Congress of American Indians and being a proud representative for the city of Seattle. I don't know what's in store for me, and so I'm kind of giddy about this because I am a grandma now. I have a new grandson, new granddaughter.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I almost feel like I felt 30, 40 years ago, like I'm stepping out, I'm embarking in a new era where, I don't have to, because before I didn't want to run for office while my kids were little, certainly not in high school. And that's when I decided to run, is when the last one got out the door and got into college. So I'm still engaged in Indian country and city and county and what happens to our great state and city. But I don't know what's next. I'm really involved in women's sports. I'm really involved with youth in sports, working with Rise Above and all these great Indigenous and non-Indigenous organizations, working with One Roof Foundation, trying to build up a hockey. And yes, I know you love the Mariners, and like my husband does, and hopefully someday they'll make it to the Big Mitt. I call it that, But all of that still is like a place that I want to land, but I'm not sure how. But at the same time, I like the policy legislative. I guess I like the piece of, it's wonderful to be aspirational. It's wonderful to have the kind of morality-driven values that you want to see, but going hand in hand the pragmatism that's needed to get things done.
Yeah, and I wanted to follow up on that piece because this job has been very challenging for you and a lot of other council members. And I got a question about this that I thought phrased this in an interesting way from one of our viewers. Rob wrote this. The approval rating of the city council over the last year plus has been low. Do you think about that? And do you feel any pressure to try to change public perception of the council? Can I ask the question in that way? How do you approach that?
Well, I always have to laugh when Chamber or anybody wants to call me and say, do you want to go through the poll? I'm like, I don't need a poll to know that people think we suck. So
Got it.
I got that. So one thing about being a district representative is you see your constituents like, you know, at QFC and Walgreen and getting gas. So I hear it, but I also hear good stuff. No, I don't. I think that I try to be honest and straightforward and recognize the humanity of every person, even during public comment when we're being called names. That I don't think it's my job to be liked. I think it's my job to be respected and that people know that I don't lie. And I think that's the best any politician can do because being honest is the coin of the realm. If you're going to be a good politician, you have to be honest. Even when people are angry at you and they don't want to hear what you have to say. In all my years, and I've worked for 2 governors and been around, one thing I've learned, and particularly in Indian country and with tribal leaders as well, is people can be mad at you, they can be angry at the way you voted, but as long as you're honest and you tell the truth, they'll almost not so much forgive you, but they'll just kind of move along like, okay, at least I know where you stand.
Yeah.
And that's important. My name is important. My reputation, my family lineage is important. My grandfather was on Blackfeet Tribal Council. All of that means something to me.
Yeah, and just to wrap up here, we have about a minute. I think it's your intent to make sure that your legacy does live on, and I'm thinking about the Indigenous Advisory Council you've helped set up for the city. Let's say there is not a Native American person on city council in the future. I think you're trying to ensure that those issues do stay top of mind for people that are on the council.
Well, the reason why we put together and handed it off to Department of Neighborhoods, DON, Francesca's been phenomenal, and the mayor's office, Tim Rainan, who used to be on Puyallup Tribal Council and is also a lawyer and is now working with Mayor Harrell, which is great, is that I wanted to have that space, as we should in every government, where there is tribal consultation in government to government, and that it's institutionalized in our city code, and also a place where the mayor's office can go, where the legislative body can go, SPD, anyone in this whole constellation of city departments. So people used to just come to me or my committee, and I don't think you need to be Indigenous or Native to have this issue, because I have a lot of issues in my committee that, you know, and again, this is where we get to, it's not about race. That's important. It's a political relationship, and you have to understand the political realities, but who you need to speak to. One thing about our Indigenous Advisory Council, which I can almost say is a fact, there is no other advisory council that has 4 elected tribal council members. We have elected from Suquamish, Muckleshoot, Snoqualmie, and Yakima. Yes, from the other side of the mountains.
Right.
And these are 4 electeds out of Indian country who sit at the table, and we sit, you know, even to tell us what these issues are. And I think that takes a lot of pressure off the legislative branch and an elected leader like me to know that, and for my colleagues, that there's somewhere they can go to have an answer or how they get there, particularly on policy.
Thank you so much. A proud part of your legacy there. Council President Debora Juarez with me, and we will see you next time on Council Edition.